Of you who are joining us on YouTube, welcome to another episode of Renewing Your Mind. Um, I created this series after I learned some things about not only my own mind, but I learned some things about the dynamic of consciousness. And that partially is a result of becoming a neurolinguistic programming practitioner, but also as a result of studying out some of the verses in the Bible that kind of talk about change and repentance and whatnot. So I kind of want to recap a little bit about the Hebrew language. And then I'm going to recap a little bit about the Greek language, and then we're going to get into the discussion. So let's start by jumping straight over to the board. We have this situation where Hebrew, let me talk about that for just a moment for those of you who are new. Hebrew is not a literal language. And what I mean by that is that the Hebrew words are all idiomatic, allegorical meanings of words. For example, in the ancient pictographic Hebrew, we have the word in Hebrew for unclean is going to be tet. I apologize for my atrocious Hebrew. It's hard to write pretty on this board. Sorry, this is supposed to be a mem, tet, and then mem. Oh man, mess this up here too. Let's see, I guess we're gonna go on that. There we go. Mem, and then the aleph. This is the Hebrew word to may. Okay. Actually, I think that is backwards there. To may. Like that, I believe it is. Okay. And it means unclean, right? Uh so let's say, let's just call it um because of the um translation of the Bible, let's call it, we'll call it ceremony unclean, right? But the thing is this comes from an ancient pictographic root. Now recall anything that has a yod, I'm gonna go ahead and write this down. Anything that has a yod, uh, um, uh, a vav, a hey, an aleph, and we'll represent that by two X's, a doubled last letter is a child root, meaning you can trace the parent root from the child root by dropping one of those letters. So in this case, we can drop the aleph, and then we can bring these down into their ancient pictographic words, which is a drawing of a basket or what would represent a container, and the drawing of water. So the idiomatic usage of tomei is literally the solution to being unclean, which is what? To wash, right? So this means to wash, but the truth is that it actually means unclean in the sense of the cause for washing. Okay, so that's allegorical. It's not, it's idiomatic. It's not the literal meaning. Now, the reason I bring this up is because we have a lot of allegorical stuff going on when it comes to renewing the mind. Okay, take for example, let's talk a minute about the ancient Hebrew nomadic culture, right? They have a tent, right? They have four walls. One of them is a door. Moves in and outward. And inside, they have the sentiment that the Father is the pole that holds up the tent structure, and the Mother is the glue that holds the glued tent panels together. That's the Hebrew word for mother, and the Hebrew word for father are actually in the ancient pictographic Hebrew, the strength of the tent and strong water or bone glue. Now, the reason why this is important is because when we're dealing with the mother and father, obviously we are dealing with provision, protection, and instruction, right? Provision, protection, and instruction. And one of the reasons why this is kind of foreign to most people is because it's an ancient nomadic lifestyle that has obviously been lost because we dwell in permanent dwellings. In fact, Yahweh even spoke about that. You know, when the Israelites went into the promised land, he said, when you dwell in houses you have not built. Two things are important. Number one is that most archaeological digs in Egypt did not turn up housing for the Hebrew slaves, but instead turned up mass graves where the Hebrews had been buried. Generally speaking, from what we can tell, they were probably dwelling in a tent city that obviously the elements would have wiped out long before archaeologists came along. My point is that they go from being these tent dwellers to being these city dwellers, and in this process of dwelling in these cities that they did not build, they live in houses, they live in permanent dwellings, which means all of their Hebraic ancient nomadic lifestyle becomes a philosophy and not a practice. Now, you're still going to practice that lifestyle, but obviously you're going to think like a nomad because you're in a permanent dwelling, which is very, very convenient for us today because obviously we don't have tents that we dwell in. So in that way, I think it's important to understand that this is philosophical, right? That this is not based upon some type of concrete philosophy or theology as a result of the cultural connections. But instead, what we were encountering is actually the premise of a very dynamic and movable philosophy that kind of flexes with our culture, our lifestyle, etc. The reason why that's important is because when we talk about provision, protection, and instruction, that's pretty foreign to the understanding. Because why? Because we know that the Hebrews and the inhabitants, as it were, that were alive during the writing or predating the writing of the New Testament are going to encounter they're going to encounter they're going to encounter changes to their environment, but still be able to adapt that lifestyle. And as a nation, they believed that they were provided for, protected by, and instructed by the God, the God of creation. Now, there's a couple of reasons why that's important, but one of the biggest reasons that it is important, I mean, there's some minor points, right? But one of the biggest reasons why that's important is because in a culture that does not believe in a deity that would provide, that culture is not going to have the same values concerning provision, protection, and instruction. Now, the reason why that's important is because in that way, It now becomes the tent now becomes the focal point of sin and righteousness. Okay. Now, because of that fact, we have the idea of going, let me switch this back to the board. We have the idea of going in and coming out. Okay. And the idea is that when we press towards the tent, presser is represented by two front teeth in the Hebrew language. Two front teeth. In fact, we'll draw the whole picture here. Big old guy with a grin, right? Two front teeth representing pressure. And then we have the vav, which means to establish. It was a tent stake. It established the tent to not be blown away by the elements. And of course, we have then the representation of the tent in this symbol. We knew that this symbol represented the tent. And so as a result of that, we have this word, which is pronounced shuv, okay? And it literally means to press towards the established tent. Shuv. Well, intriguingly enough, if we were to just reverse all of that, and so reading from right to left, we would have the tent, we would have the vav, and we would have the two front teeth, right? Now, what's intriguing about that is then those letters are reversed, but this means shame and means to press away from the tent. And this, of course, means to press to the tent, right? And this is pronounced boosh, and literally means shame. But again, it is an idiomatic process of moving away from provision, protection, and instruction, moving away from the provider, moving away from the protector, moving away from the instructor of the universe, right? This tent represents the universe in its philosophical understanding. Okay? All right. So the reason why that's important is because the word teshuvah is improperly interpreted as repent. If my people who are called by my name, right, would turn from their wicked ways, teshuvah, right, and seek my face, then I would hear from heaven and I would forgive their sins and I would heal their land, right? So shuv or teshuvah means to return to the tent, return to provision, protection, and instruction, which we are dependent upon a deity to provide. In our myth, right, in our belief, we believe that the intensification of all power in the universe stuffs itself into a perceivable God called Yahweh. And that perceivable God, which is the only way we can understand him, is as a husband, as a father, and eventually as an example of sonship, an example of servitude, right? So only way we can understand him. Well, then we are challenged to understand that there's something bigger than him, right? That he actually is. But we can only deal with the Father, which of course is still nomadic lifestyle, anthropomorphic assignments to the intensification of all power in the universe so we can understand him. Now, why is that so relevant? Well, when we talk about teshuvah, what we're really doing is pressing towards the tent or returning to a state in which we're willing to receive provision, protection, and instruction from the intensification of all power in the universe, or as Christianity understands him, God. Okay? However, that is not, unfortunately, the language that is used in the Greek for the verse that is the theme of our series. This series is designed around Romans chapter 12, verse 2, right? Be not conformed to the ways of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Thereby you will prove the good and perfect will of God. Good, perfect, and acceptable will of God. I believe that's New King James Version. So what we want to do then is we're going to look at the Greek here, okay? And so what we're going to do is I'm going to jump over to my tablet and we're going to go into Romans chapter 12, verse 2. And I'm using the Young's literal translation because that's probably the most accurate English translation that maintains the Greek grammar that is very different from English grammar. Now, there is something very important in this little passage, and that is that it starts with and. Let's see in the Greek if it starts with and. And it indeed does. We have the word kai, which is the word and, okay? And so going back into and, we need to look at the front of this thing. I call upon you, therefore, brethren, through the compassions of God. We've talked a little bit about this, that compassion is the conduit by which energy moves, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, living and sanctified, acceptable to God, your intelligent service. Well, there's some interesting words there, right? Let's take a look at this word intelligent in the Greek and see what we're going to come up with here. I'm pretty sure that it's going to be this word right here, which is going to be logikos.
Strong's G 3050. Logikos. Logikos.
Okay, logikos, close enough. But from the idea of logos, right, which is the word. In fact, the first usage in the first usage of logos in the book of John is going to be in it's going to be in verse 1. Actually, so I would have to take it back actually even more, I think, to Lego. Then I think we'll probably get into John verse 1. Anyways, that whole idea of in the beginning was the word, right? And we know that the word, okay, see, so that one's not working either. The word actually is going to be Torah. Now, I'm not going to spend the time to explain why that's true. But anyways, my point is that when it says intelligent, that's how they're interpreting intelligent. Or that's what they're interpreting intelligent from. Okay. But be not conformed to this age. And of course, we know in the King James, it says, be not conformed to this world. But that word is uranos, and it means the universe. Be not conformed to this universe, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So this word renewing, or I mean, this word transformed is actually going to be one of our key points. And it is actually the word metamorpho. So let's talk a minute about meta. Meta is a preposition that means to be with or behind, okay, or after, or in accompaniment to. And then morpho means to form, literally where we get the word form. And it's the same as to form by which a person or thing strikes the vision. And then we've got morphes, which is a part of something. Okay. Now, let me explain some things real quick. When we're talking about metamorpho, it is very important to understand that when we're dealing with the transforming of something, it is an accompaniment of form, of becoming something. So notice that it doesn't actually say be transformed. It says to be formed in the renewing of your mind. So we need to look at that word renewing, right? So getting back over here to renewing, let's see, renewing of your mind. I have to go down here for this one. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind, which is, I'm going to go ahead and let him pronounce that.
Strong's G 342, nakinosis. Nakinosis.
Anakainosis. Glad he said it. And the principle is that it is from the word anakaino or anakainu, I think. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Anak ahino. Anak ahino. So what's ana? Ana is into or in the midst of, and kaianos is an interesting word. Or kanos, sorry. Kahinas, that's how we need to pronounce it. Kahinas. Oh, they have these wonderful little Greek has these wonderful little accent marks that you have to pay attention to that I never do. Okay, and it means new, right? So what is this? This is being in the midst of being new. Okay. I have to get on my soapbox for a minute. This is Paul speaking to Pharisees in the Roman Empire, specifically in the city of Rome. How do we know it's Pharisees? Well, number one, the arguments that he makes against other rabbis. Number two, the statements that he makes, like, for example, using the word brethren, or those who know the law. You need to know that Pharisees use that language to exclude those who do not study with them. Those who do not study with them are the unlearned, okay? The learned, and then there's the masters. So there's the students or the apprentices, and then there's the masters. So there's the students and the rabbis. Now, the reason why this is so important is because when we are dealing with Romans, we need to remember he's speaking to rabbis. So he tells them to dwell in the state of being new. Now, this isn't the first time Paul has claimed this. This isn't the first time that Paul has brought this up. He says, stand ye therefore in the liberty of Christ, right? Not being brought again into subjection. In another place, he says that you need to stand in your renewedness, right? In another place, he says, behold, if any man be in Christ, all things have become new. The old things have passed away. That all things have become new is this idea that there's a different person, a different human being. Well, Paul then goes on, because he's talking to very intelligent people, to add to this. And that also explains verse 1, by the way. Verse 1, calling upon us to be sacrificed. Who would understand that but a rabbi, right? Okay. I mean, we pretend to understand it, but the truth is we don't understand it because we did not live that lifestyle, and it's a renegotiation to try to apply it to your life today. You've never brought a lamb to the altar and then ate its flesh after it was cooked on the altar. He says the transformed by the renewing of your mind. Let's take a look at that word mind just really quick. Nothing really important to know. It's the mind comprising alike the faculties of perceiving and understanding and those of feeling, judging, and determining. The intellectual faculty from the word ginosko, intriguing, to learn or know, right? So this is this nous, right, is a derivative of gnosis or knowledge. Well, there's a few reasons why this is so important. The first one is that this was not written in Greek, okay? So there's a couple things that we need to do. We need to try to take it back to the Hebrew to try to gain a better understanding. Metamorpho literally means with form, right? Not transformed. So be with form in the midst of being new in your knowledge. Well, that's a very different animal, isn't it? And please understand, when they say the mind comprising alike the faculties, let's look at it again. The mind comprising alike the faculties of perceiving and understanding and those of feeling, judging, and determining, the intellectual faculty, the understanding, reason in the narrowest sense, or in a narrower sense, as the capacity for spiritual truth. Spiritual truth being what? Knowledge. Okay. And this is deriving from our Greek word ginosko, which is where we get gnosis, right? Gnosis. Okay. So let's chat about this a second. First of all, you would agree with me that reads a little bit more different than what we've heard in the English, where we're transformed by the renewing of our mind, right? And you know, this series is called Renewing Your Mind. So obviously there is a connection, but let's see if we can't bring this back to the Hebrew. So the first thing that we can probably do is get away with looking at the Septuagint, right? So as we go in and we take a look at the Septuagint, we're going to be looking specifically at metamorpho. Where was metamorpho used in the Tanakh? Look at that. There are no concordance results for the Strong's number in the Greek concordance of the Septuagint. So getting back into Textus Recepticus and going back over here to the Strong's Dictionary entry, we still don't see any Hebrew. We don't see any examples in Tanakh or Old Testament that would be indicative of something we could latch onto. It is definitely a late Greek word, right? It's not going to be used in the Septuagint. However, we do know that is from this word, which is morpho, right? So when we go into morpho, let's see if we can find anything. And again, the Thayers indicates that there's really nothing that speaks of it, but look at this. It has a Septuagint entry. It has a Septuagint entry. In fact, it doesn't even have a Septuagint entry in the Strongs, but it does in the Thayers. We'll jump over to Isaiah 44:18. Let's see what it says. They have not known, nor do they understand, for he hath daubed their eyes from seeing, and their heart from acting wisely. Isaiah 44:18. Let's go into Septuagint and see what we can see. And it looks like we're actually going to be using this word here in a very, very odd way. I'm not sure that I necessarily am agreeing with that yet. So firsthand, it doesn't look like a derivative of metamorpho. And so intriguingly enough, we don't necessarily see that word morpho being used here. Okay. So that's kind of interesting. And perhaps maybe what he was saying there, let's go ahead and go back to our Romans 12 interlinear. And what he is saying here in this is, we went to morpho, I believe, is that in the Septuagint, Isaiah 44:18 seems to have a connection with the idea of being able to change. And yeah, Isaiah 44:18 just seems to be the scripture that we're encountering there. But then again, it says there is no concordance results for the Strong's number. So Strong's doesn't think it's there. It doesn't appear to be there. However, can we connect Galatians 4:19? My little children, of whom I travail in birth, till Christ may be formed in you. Okay. Now, Greek is a very literal language. You do not use idioms in an allegorical sense in Greek. So when he says in Galatians that Christ would be formed in you, that is not a Greek philosophical process and therefore cannot be supported by the Greek nuances. More proof that this was translated from some other language to Greek. But let's say that we go with it, say Christ being formed in us, be transformed. So with formation, right? So with formation. Okay, so obviously, when we're dealing with this, it would be important to kind of locate some similar process of shuv and bush, right? So what we're going to do, we'll go ahead and try this one right here. I'm just going to type in repent. Okay. And then I'm going to narrow it to the latter writings. And let's see. Revelation 2:22, if they may not repent. Let's go look at that Greek word and see, whoops, I did that wrong. Let's go look at that Greek word and see what we encounter here. Did not repent of their works. Strong's Concordance, number, there we go. Metaneo, right? To change one's mind. What's this neo? Oh, look, there's our word right there. Nous. To change their knowledge, right? To change their knowledge. Remember the root is ginosko. All right. And of course, meta, remember, is before, after, or behind, right? And so together it means to change one's mind. And recall that that is actually what is used in Romans chapter 12, verse 2, is a very similar concept, right? That concept of being transformed, to change into another form. Okay, so obviously two things we got going on here. The meta seems to mean change, but it doesn't mean change in the sense that it definitely means with or behind, right? But it is a preposition that denotes the being in the middle of a process, right? Okay, so when we're dealing with this, the way I want to go about this is I want to kind of present this idea that there is a connection between the weak mind, the strong mind, and being inside the tent being versus being outside the tent. and that a strong mind is actually a meek mind. Okay. But before we do that, we need to talk about a very, very important subject. And that subject is going to be fear. Okay. Now, to really get our minds wrapped around this, I want you to think about what are the things that make a human ineffective? It is their wounds, their entitlements, and their limiting beliefs. And recall, wounds are a past tense reference. Their memory. We're going to get into that in a minute because memory is not what you think it is either. But the concept is that they're recorded events and frames of reference that cause a physical, not physical, but cause a reference to become a paradigm. So it's not, it's like looking through a pair of glasses that were constructed off of your wounds, right? Okay. So now, then the next we have the entitlements, which is what a present tense frame of reference. It is a sense of having a right to something that you may or may not have a right to. And then finally, we have something interesting. We have limiting beliefs. Now, a limiting belief is interesting because what it does is it does not work off of past tense frames of references, but a belief about your competence in the future. A limiting belief will say, I can't do that. I cannot. So I can with the negation particle not. I can, which means what? That the capability to be able to do something in the future is limited by that negation particle not. Okay. Now you might say, well, wait a minute now. Limiting beliefs appear to be built off of past tense frames of reference. Many people saying, oh, I can't do this because this happened to me. Well, that's somewhat true and somewhat not true, because the difference between a wound and a limiting belief is the external stimuli that created the reference. Bear with me. So let's use a benign or non-malevolent element. Let's say a car accident, okay? So a car accident instantaneously activates emotional reaction of fear to the accident occurring. That becomes a frame of reference. And what I mean by that is there's external information asserting itself upon your natural identity. And what do I mean by that? I mean that your identity should be based upon what you believe about yourself. And up until the accident, you probably believed you were a competent, I didn't say good, I said competent driver. Now, after the accident, that has been brought into question, hasn't it? Even if it was not your fault, there is that little bit of tinge every time you come to a similar intersection or see that type of a vehicle. Perhaps it was a semi or maybe a Suburban or something like that. And now there's a hesitation, right? Now, that external information is not telling you the truth. Because the truth is that if you were an incompetent driver, you would not be driving at all. Did you make a mistake? Did you have an error in judgment? Maybe you tried to shoot the gap, whatever. Whatever it is, that external information is not the truth of who you are, is not your identity. That external information needs to be categorized in the realm of learnings, not in the realm of competency, right? Okay, so now we move into the limiting belief that we could never be a commercial driver. Now, obviously, we're going to frame reference that particular accident and say, that proves that I am not a competent driver. But unless you didn't get back behind the wheel, that's actually not true. Don't get me wrong, there is trauma reference. But your belief that you're not competent as a commercial driver doesn't necessarily have anything to do with that accident. A person can feel that they can't accomplish something because of fear of failure, or fear that it's not going to happen the way that they expect it to, and therefore they're not going to try. Let me tell you a secret about the word try, and there's going to be some intrigue to this. When a person is in a hypnotic state and you ask them to try to do something and they wake up, like if you tell them, when you wake up, when you hear the sound of a bell, I want you to try to bark like a dog. They will not be able to bark like a dog because of the sound of the bell. The sound of the bell triggers their hypnotic response, right? But the problem is you told them to try. The reason I say this is because the subconscious mind, which runs 95% of your life, does not believe try is an attempt, but believes try means you won't be able to do it. Try creates doubt in the subconscious mind. Why is this important? Because when we say, I will try, we are actually saying, I will fail. Now, I know that sounds off the wall, but the truth is that there's a reason why I'm bringing this up. And that is that when there is doubt in the belief of capability or doubt in the belief of competence, it will result in fear, okay, of failure. The fear of letting someone else down. Well, what if I run somebody over with the semi? Or what if I get in this accident? Or what if this happens? Well, the truth is that still has nothing to do with your identity. You are a competent driver, okay? That's the principle here. But what's really going on with all these wounds, entitlements, and limiting beliefs is fear. Now, let's talk a minute about fear. Remember, this is the Renewing Your Mind series, but this is the Imagination mini series. And I have taught you over time that our wounds are actually imaginations that we create. Let's say that a person is abusive to us, and now our life is defined by that abuse. Well, that's a lie. But the truth is that we're the ones who actually construct the imagination about who we are. And what I mean by that is that you imagine that you are a victim and therefore you are a victim. Now, I know that sounds a little bit off the wall, but the truth is since when does somebody through their actions get to assert who your identity is? The truth is that your identity is not defined by the actions of others, nor their input. And if it is, you will fail. What do I mean by that? I mean that if your life is defined by something that somebody else did, and all of your life decisions and choices are the result of that one single thing, you have constructed a false image. And get this, in the ancient Hebrew context of worship, which had nothing to do with waving your hands and singing pretty songs and having harmony, but instead in putting your face to the ground to acknowledge a greater and designating yourself as a lesser. When you conform, there's that word conform, which we're going to look at in a minute. When you conform to the information, and it is not the information that is the truth about who you are, then you are worshiping a false image. You're bowing to it. You're making micro adjustments in fear of it. So would entitlements come in when we're talking about fear? Well, in entitlements, we are talking about fear. A person is afraid that they're not going to have enough, or that somebody else has better than them, and that as a result of some subjugation mentality that believes that they're not as worthy as the next person, we're breathing their oxygen, we're sitting in their chairs, we're occupying their time, we're occupying their space, we're occupying their parking space, we are occupying their moment instead of it being your own experience, your own moment, right? And so the premise is that entitlements are about a fear of missing out or a fear of not having enough. A scarcity mentality results in an entitlement to disobey Torah and not pay tithes and hoard money, hoard supplies, hoard goods because of a belief that there's not enough to share. An abundance mentality believes there's enough for everyone. And usually I have found that that is true every single time. So now, what about the limiting beliefs? Where does fear comes into that? That is again that fear of failure or the doubt of competency, right? Now that can be the result of abuse, trauma, etc. But the truth is by the time we construct our limiting beliefs, we construct them off of our belief in our competency. Okay. Sometimes it's a fear of letting people down. Yes, of course, especially if you have fallen into that subjugation type of mentality, or you've fallen into a dependence mentality where you are actually being validated by some external force, right? Something is telling you you're good, telling you you're safe, telling you you're okay. And the truth is you can never trust those words, because until you know that you are, you aren't. Okay. Now, the dysfunction that occurs as a result of these wounds, limiting beliefs, and entitlements is bitterness, resentment, the poison of coveting, the poison of jealousy, but also it can be the poison of limiting your loved ones or your family. I actually have met people who, because of their lack of self-esteem, had drugged their whole entire family into a state of subjugation as a result of a belief that they're not good enough. And now they're making sure that their family doesn't follow, or that make sure that their family follows suit. They need to be punished. In their minds, they need to be punished. They need to be more perfect. They're not doing enough, and therefore that means their family doesn't get to receive the blessings that they were supposed to receive. And you can see how this would ripple out as a person lives in their wounds, in their entitlements, and in their limiting beliefs. Entitlements can turn into a sickness of narcissism, of self-worship, which, according to Satanists, is exactly what you're supposed to do in order to worship Satan. I think there's an important element that we need to take a look here, and that is that word conformed. And be not conformed to this age. Let's leave the age part out, and let's just go with this conformed part, right? Which is a nice big old huge word that says syschemomaticia. Let's see how I did.
Strong's G 4964. Syschematizo.
Okay, I blew it.
Syschematizo.
Okay. So coming from the word soon, which means with, right? This is synagogue, right? Sorry, not soon. This is synagogue, right? This is synchronicity, right? In fact, what's intriguing is this word is actually kind of the root of synchronicity. Like here's our word right here, schema. Well, let's talk a minute about schema. The habitus, as comprising everything in a person which strikes the senses, the figure bearing discourse, actions, manner of life, etc. Right? Okay. Oh, look, there's an alternate there, which is going to be echo, which is basically to have or hold or possess, right? And so the wholeness of a human, or the connectedness of a human. All right, so altogether, to conform oneself, right? And let's see how many times it's used. Oh, 2 times. Sorry, probably not probably not translated correctly. But let's say that we look at this idea of fashion. Let's go take a look. 1 Peter 1:14, as obedient children, not fashioning yourselves to the former desires in your ignorance. Fashioning. Interesting. But either way, we have this idea of being connected to or synced to. Remember, this is with in the sense of accompaniment, right? So this is an accompaniment of a schema. Let's talk a minute about schemas. Schemas are frames of references. That's right. In psychology, a schema is a frame of reference that basically represents the whole picture, right? Represented into deletions, distortions, and overgeneralizations. Let me give you an example. Let's say that I have an aversion to the color green. Now, here's the intrigue. I have an aversion to the color green because in 1988, a green truck hit my dad's vehicle, right? So I don't like the color green. Maybe the guy did a hit and run, whatever it was, some sort of adverse emotion occurred, and I now identify the color green with pain. Well, guess what? Along comes this beautiful woman, and everything is perfect about her except her dress that's the same color as that truck. Don't know how they made a dress the same color as that truck, considering the metallic paint and all that, but let's not get into that. So the premise is now here she comes along and she's beautiful. Or maybe it's a man and he's got that dark green crevice, right? Well, okay. Point being is that you look at that and immediately are turned off because your mind already categorizes her in green with the emotion of the accident. That's right. That's how our mind works. It takes and generalizes by categorizing things together. It's lazy that way. It saves space, right? It crams all the same mess together. So in order to be able to recognize the beauty of a woman in a green dress, you would need to heal from the trauma of the stupid truck. And nobody knows that. Nobody knows that the meta, that's right, the meta in a person's mind is made up of these generalizations. Okay. So in terms of conforming, the way that you want to think about this is that it's saying, do not be with schema of this age. Now, there's a lot of ways we could interpret this. We could go ahead and dump this into that Christian worldview, right? Or we could realize that there's something more at stake here. And that plays a role in verse 1 and verse 3. If we look at verse 3, we can get a little bit of context because he starts with the word for, meaning what? Meaning that he wants you to reference what he said before, right? For I say, through the grace that was given me to everyone who's among you, not to think above what it behooveth to think, but to think so as to think wisely, as to each God deal a measure of faith. Ooh, this is getting pretty heated here, right? For as in one body we have many members, and all members have not the same office. Wow. So basically, it seems as though he's saying, change the individual so that the corporate collective changes, right? Wow. So this kind of becomes a duty, right? This kind of becomes something more important than just getting better from a car accident. So let's talk about fear again in the sense of this with schema concept. First of all, there's something very important you need to know. Well, there's two very important things you need to know about fear. The first one is that there's a deficit in the provision, protection, and instruction in some fashion. Now, we can discuss that in a minute, but what you need to know is that deficit creates a self-preservation activation. What do I mean by that? I mean that when provision, protection, and instruction are not present, for whatever reason, in our minds, we step into a state of trying to create it ourselves. However, our myth, right? Our truth says that we can only get that from the divine. We can only receive provision, protection, and instruction from the divine. And our forefathers, the Israelites in the wilderness during the wilderness season, in the wilderness of Sin, literally encountered this concept. We have no food to eat, we have no water to drink, and our enemies are attacking us. And what happens? Manna falls from the sky, water from a split in the rock, and what? Protection from Amalek through the rising of Moses' hands and the lowering of them, right? Point being, provision, protection, and instruction are present in those processes, and therefore our ancestors learned it the hard way. We are supposed to look at it. Paul said it was not written for them, but for those of us who are in Christ, right? 2 Corinthians chapter 10, I believe that is. Okay, so now it is important that we discuss how fear works, because it's not what you think. And this is the part that is imperative to the imagination series. When we start to get into the power behind the imagination, you will understand how devastating a fear really is, and how Paul is trying to let us know that through that word schema, sin schema, right? Or with a schema. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. What do we know? We know that a fear feels horrible, right? Why does it feel horrible? Well, have you ever been in danger? Have you ever had a moment, let's say that moment where you're driving and a car is coming and you're coming, and you slam on the brakes and you feel that intense anxiety, and instantaneously you're like, you idiot. Like you do not know why they crossed the intersection when they did. And perhaps maybe it was you who was the idiot. You don't know. But let's just say that you're not the idiot and they are. We don't know why they crossed it. We don't know if they were on autopilot or what other dangers they were putting into their lives while they were driving a vehicle, like texting. But the premise is that what is true is instantaneously there's this uncleanness feeling. There's this energy drain, and there's this overwhelming anxious yuck, right? Well, that's the fight or flight. Perhaps maybe in your lifetime, you've had an opportunity, an unfortunate one, to get in a physical altercation, perhaps a fight. And there's that yucky feeling. That is fear. However, It's not what you think it is. Let me explain. Remember that part where we schema things, where we stuff things into a generalization? Well, fear has a very interesting category. Anger, danger, fear, anxiety, wantonness, right? Let me explain that one a little better. Instead of using a King James term, it's hard to explain wantonness, but the feeling is basically an uncomfortable hunger or a deficit that needs an answer that is insatiable. How about that? Those are all the same emotional process. Why? Because emotions don't exist either. All emotions are is your physical experience of the hormones that are processing at the time when the cognition occurs that causes the emotion. Let me explain. Fear is an adrenaline and epinephrine process. Epinephrine creates the fast twitch response in your system, and adrenaline creates strength to activate the muscles in a stronger and more powerful way. So as a result of that, what you're experiencing is an adrenaline rush. Well, there's an intrigue there because some people seek that out. But the truth is that in the end, all of this is the result of danger. But here's the problem. Danger is present. Fear is not. Danger is real. It is here with you. Your five senses can experience danger. Fear does not. But here's the problem. Fear is a frame of reference to danger in the past. Intrigue is that doesn't necessarily have to do with the physical. It can be actually cognitive. It can be a cognitive experience that now is a fear. For example, someone is emotionally abusive to a person. They never touch them, but the words that they say and their body language and their actions cause that person to be brought low, and their actions and their statements are all informational, false information being fed to the person. And of course, we already got into, if you believe that, what happens. But the concept here is that fear is an imagination. What does that mean? That means that there actually is nothing. Remember when you were a kid and maybe as a boy you found a stick and it had a little handle on it with a little curve in it so you could set it on your shoulder and you pretended it was a bazooka? Was it really a bazooka? No, but I'll be darned if I didn't blow up every car in that parking lot with that bazooka, right? Or maybe you're a little girl and you've set down the teddy bear and you've set down the dolly and you got the little cups and you're sitting there and you get the cup and you sip the tea. What tea? There's no tea in there, right? It's pretend. It's fake. It doesn't exist, but our minds make it exist and we enjoy that play, right? We enjoy that time of pretending. Well, the intrigue is that prepared us to create false imaginations of the future as we got older, perhaps as a result of a danger in our childhood, perhaps the result of abuse or mistrust, right? I mean, this doesn't have to be a pretty picture because God knows this world is sick, right? We do not have to stay all puppies and kittens. We can get into the yuck here and say somebody was hurt really bad. And now when they use their imagination, they use it to anticipate not being hurt again. So the premise is that what we do is we use our imagination, right? We entertain the pretend. So we will use our imagination. We will construct information into usable pictures. When you're a little girl and you've got the mud pie, God knows, okay, in most cases, you're not going to eat that dirt. Okay. But the premise is you got the mud pie and you're pretending and it's a chocolate cake and you got the teddy bear out there and mom's going to kill you because it's in the mud, but that doesn't matter because we're having a cake party, right? And while we have that cake party, all of a sudden we decide to eat the dirt. Now here's the intrigue. If you ate the dirt, are you going to eat chocolate cake? No. Do you think it's chocolate cake? Yes, of course. You're making what's called a micro adjustment. You're trying to make it become a reality. Here's the important part of this. When we fear, we are using the same process of the mind that creates memory. That's right. All of your visions of the future are memories. Your mind constructs, because this is what I want you to think about. What has a fear done? A fear has anticipated something that's going to happen in the future. When it happens, how do you know that it happened? You remembered the fear, right? You remembered the fear. Now, we're not going to get into why it happened at this moment, but you remembered the fear because it was filed as a memory. Can you believe that? Your mind is full of memories of things that have not yet happened, that may or may not happen, but that you have already begun to live with. What do I mean by that? You've already started to make micro adjustments. You don't think you have, but you have. Those moments when you do that little extra thing and it starts to feel yucky is fear. Activated. The difference between fear and the imagination as a memory without any activation is no action taken. But if you do that little tiny thing to micro adjust, just in case that fear was to come to pass, I'm going to be ready for it in this way. I'm not actually going to do a whole lot of, I'm not going to put a lot of effort into it because I don't know if it's going to happen, but I want to just be ready, right? Well, that just being ready just told the universe that you want it to happen. How do we know? Because in its simplicity, that's the direction you decided to make a micro adjustment. Let me tell you what you're not going to do. And here I can tell you is one of those moments when you can turn off the video and not watch anymore. If you were to make micro adjustments on imaginations about the future that are memories that were positive, your life would change. Done. There's no more for me to say. However, that's not going to work for you. You need to hear and understand the damage that the fear actually does. You need to understand that the neural peptides that actually register the memory in your mind are going to create a future frame of reference. That's right. Just like you reference the wound and say, oh no, I'm not a good person, you will reference the fear and say, oh no, I can't do that. And you don't even know how powerful that is because it's become a part of your memory. How terrifying is that really to your mind right now? That you have memorized your fears and that they are your frames of reference. That's the power of the imagination in the wounds, entitlements, and limiting beliefs. And the next time that we get together, we're going to talk about why we're more apt to accept a fear than we are a positive future. But right now, I want you to think about how much fun it used to be to pretend. How much excitement we got out of being in the airplane and jumping out of it. And really, we only jumped off the bike, right? Or, having all the friends over and, pretending like we're, in a forest and we have a campfire, and hopefully nobody sets the carpet on fire, but you get my point. A sleepover and we're at a campfire and, there's critters out and there's the teddy bear in the corner, right? And so pretend how much fun it used to be, how enjoyable it was to pretend, and how horrible it feels now to pretend. Because you don't even know that that's what you're doing. You don't know that you are pretending the future. And you're pretending a bad future. So, having said all that, I think we've got a better understanding now of both our verse, our actual verse, right, being transformed by the renewing of your mind. What's the renewing of your mind that needs to occur? We need to start using our imaginations, don't we? And we need to stop using them for evil, because that's exactly what that is. It's a twisted mind. It's frames of reference from darkness. That's all fear is. Don't get me wrong, it's one of the most terrifying things that I've ever had to confront in my entire life, to actually think in imagination and intent my heart to not make micro adjustments, because it's impossible. The future doesn't exist. Tomorrow is not promised, and anything that is a reference to the future is an imagination and a renegotiation of reality. So it's very, very important for you to understand that you have to alter your reality to pretend, don't you? Right? Because God knows you can't eat that dirt, right? You can't eat that dirt pie. It's a great pie. Teddy bear likes it, but you can't eat it because it's fake. It doesn't exist, right? There's no tea in those cups. The car didn't blow up. It was really cool when it did, but the car didn't blow up, did it? No. And so why all of a sudden has it become so real now? Because we altered reality. We've altered reality with an imagination about time that doesn't exist. There is no future. The moment we arrive at the moment after the moment we were in is not the future, is it? No, it's the present, and that now is the past. There is no actual future moment except in your imagination. And that, my friends, can become your catalyst for super abundance, prosperity, and mastery, or it can be the catalyst for your destruction. Shalom, shalom.